Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adam Odesser. I am director of the Dr. Stuart Lessons Israel Action Center at the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington. Today, we mark 129 days of war between Israel and Hamas, 129 days since the horrific attack by Hamas on Israel. Last night, we were relieved to hear about the rescue of 2 Israeli hostages by the Israeli Defense Forces, 60-year-old Fernando Simon Marman and 70-year-old Luis Har. We hope and pray for the moment that 134 additional hostages will be brought home. For today's webinar, Raising Our Voices, Sexual Violence and Hamas War Against Israel, we are joined by 2 esteemed guests who have been on the front lines of fighting for women's rights and sexual assault victims. Today's discussion will be moderated by JCRC's Associate Director, Guila Siegel, who, as part of her nearly 30 years experience in Jewish community relations and public policy, has spent a great deal of time focusing on gender issues, including serving as the founding director of the Tikkun Olam Women's Foundation of Greater Washington, a Jewish grant-making organization dedicated to advancing social change for women and girls, both locally and in Israel. I will now pass it over to Guila to introduce our speakers and begin today's discussion. Guila, please.
Thank you, Adam. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Charlotte Barrios, our Israel Program Associate, for being instrumental in putting together today's program. On October 7th, an army of Hamas terrorists slaughtered 1,200 Israelis, took over 200 civilians as hostages, including children and the elderly, savagely raped and sexually assaulted untold others, and burned entire communities to the ground. It was the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, the worst of humanity. How many times have we heard that terse clinical summary of the events of that horrible day? The words do not, cannot capture the haunting images and narratives of that terrible day. That is perhaps most true of the sickeningly brutal and debasing sexual assaults that took place. And we fear for the remaining young female hostages still in captivity, who are being subjected to repeated sexual assault, according to the freed hostages. And predictably, after the acts themselves, many of them documented on video and through eyewitness testimony, comes the gaslighting, the denial, a second violation of Jewish women's dignity, integrity, and safety. The shameful silence of the UN, including UN Women, and women's advocates the world over, has enraged world Jewry. Social media is rife with messaging and images accusing Israel of manufacturing the reports of mass sexual violence, denying the truth of these victims, men and women, many, if not most of whom, cannot speak for themselves. They've taken their truth to their graves, and it is left to us as Jewish women, as Jews, as human beings, to raise our voices on their behalf, and on behalf of the living victims, both women and men, of this barbarism. Although the UN has now launched an investigation after very weak initial statements, they have been unacceptably late to this table, only confirming for Israelis the institutional biases that have made the UN hostile to Israel. How do we move from grief and anger to action? I'm honored to be in dialogue today with 2 extraordinary women devoting their lives to this work, Meredith Jacobs and Miriam Schler. Meredith Jacobs is the CEO of Jewish Women International, an organization dedicated to creating awareness, education, and advocacy initiatives to help end violence against women and girls. In addition to statewide advocacy efforts, Meredith has spearheaded many JWI initiatives, including the National Center on Domestic and Sexual Violence in the Jewish Community, the Collaborative of Jewish Domestic Violence Agencies, the Women's Financial Empowerment Institute, Job Readiness for Survivors, and much more. Meredith is also an award-winning journalist and former editor-in-chief of the Washington Jewish Week. She earned a BA in English from Haverford College and holds a Master of Science in Business from Johns Hopkins University. Miriam Schler is the executive director at the Tel Aviv Sexual Assault Crisis Center, a position she has held since 2004. Under Miriam's 2 decades of stewardship, the center has transformed from a small NGO for a marginalized cause into a powerhouse that facilitates dozens of targeted projects, fields over 12,000 hotline crisis interventions for survivors of sexual violence, and has 250 volunteers. She has pushed forward groundbreaking programming not only for women, but also for male survivors and survivors across the spectrum of Israeli society, including underserved, underrecognized, or isolated sectors. Miriam's strategic vision and unrelenting commitment has been critical in transitioning the subject of sexual violence in Israel into the mainstream. Her hard work has played a central role in raising awareness through educational outreach while sparking social change, along with projects focused on supporting survivors on an individual and personal level. Before I begin our dialogue, just a bit of housekeeping. Each of our speakers will speak for about 10 minutes, followed by a moderated conversation between Meredith, Miriam, and myself, during which time they will take questions from the Q&A chat that you should see on the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A feature at any point, and I'll also mention that closed captioning is available at the bottom of your screen. Now I want to pass it over to our speakers, and I believe that Miriam Schler in Tel Aviv is having some problems connecting. And so I want to start with Meredith, and then hopefully Miriam, by the time your remarks are done, hopefully she will be online with us. So Meredith.
Guila, thank you so much, and thank you to all of you for being here. It's interesting. I heard early on that this was a war being fought by 20-somethings. In Israel, it's the IDF soldiers, and here in the U.S., it's on college campuses and online, and much in the same way as our young people are engaged in this. I feel the same about women like Miriam, and the advocates who are on the ground working tirelessly, and I mean tirelessly. And I know that she'll share more, because what has happened is affecting not just the survivors, but really all of Israel, and especially the women of Israel. What we know, and we know this from, notably a months-long investigation by the New York Times, is that the sexual violence that was part of October 7th were not one-offs. They weren't isolated events. It was part of a coordinated campaign designed to traumatize and humiliate the Israeli public. And I would add that when you intentionally plan to rape and murder women, you plot to destroy the future. What we know at JWI and those of us in the field of violence against women is that rape is about power and control and hate. And in this case, it was, for Hamas, the trifecta of hate who they were going after: Jewish, Israeli, and women. It was at a level I've never heard of or could have imagined. I mean, absolutely evil. Women were butchered while being raped. The way their genitals and breasts were specifically mutilated, the way their faces were shot until they were unrecognizable. And as Guila mentioned, it didn't stop at October 7th. We know the hostages, and by the way, this is women and men, are being raped repeatedly. And there are very real concerns about the women, that some of the hostages may be pregnant, that there may be complications because of those pregnancies, ectopic pregnancies, abortions, bleeding. There may be life-threatening bleeding, most likely diseases. Some, because of the rapes, may no longer be able to have children. And in addition to the physical and sexual abuse, there's the psychological abuse. We've also heard from hostages who've been released that they are told that no one is coming, that no one cares, that the world has forgotten about them. And in a way, what the captors are saying is true if you were to consider the denial and disinformation campaigns. As I'm sure Miriam will explain when she speaks, and I'm glad she was just able to join us. It is already unbelievably hard for survivors to come forward, but knowing that they will not be believed, that their voices are not being heard or respected, really makes it almost impossible. And it's a trauma that all Jewish and Israeli women now have to carry. I want to go back to what I was first writing and speaking about immediately after October 7th, and then carry it to where we are now. Soon after October 7th, I did write an op-ed talking about my experience in a meeting with feminist organizations and the silence from the women's movement. I asked, why are those who cried, "Bring back our girls," when Boko Haram kidnapped the Chibok girls, why were they not crying to release our girls? Why were those who yelled, "Believe all women," asking our women for proof? Why were those who teach never blame the victim celebrating the rape of our women as resistance? And I know this is still an issue, and I know that there are still calls and requests to call these organizations out. And I want to talk about a couple of the things that I'm hearing now. What we're hearing from those organizations is
it's allowing it and then it stops it.
They don't know what is expected of them and why. They'll say they don't work in an international space. They wouldn't be expected to comment on anything outside of the US. We're hearing that they don't understand the connection Jews in the diaspora feel to Israel. Why are we feeling this so particularly painfully and personally? They feel they have spoken out and are still being attacked now by Jewish women who don't appreciate that they're receiving death threats. And in some cases that we don't understand how much easier it is for white women to speak. So look, I see in a way this is about relationship building. This is something that we need to move forward to do, that if we are not truly in relationship with someone before asking something of them, that's a challenge. So moving forward, there is some work to be done. I want to take a look at how, personally JWI is making sure that we speak out when there are issues in other conflict areas, and make sure that we are walking the walk. That said, what I honestly felt in that group of feminist organizations was that I didn't feel safe. That in that moment, I wasn't asking for statements or for anyone to stand and rally with me. But what I felt was that I could not talk about what I was feeling, what was happening to my people, my community, and feel that anyone would reach out with empathy and care. And I think that's the crux of it, that feeling of being hated, that these horrific attacks were deserved and warranted and celebrated. We're not going to change UN Women. UN Women is led by a Jordanian woman. She cannot say anything in support of Israel. Perhaps this is why when the statement was finally made way too late, it was about, quote unquote, those being affected. It did not name Israeli women. Calling them out, petitioning them is not going to change anything. But I will share that there's research currently being conducted by former ambassadors to the Commission on the Status of Women, looking at how, where, and for whom UN Women applies its various policies. When that report is released, we will share it widely and loudly, with what I'm assuming will illustrate the bias and hypocrisy. What I do think we need to do now is something about the disinformation campaigns. The world has moved from silence to denial, from hashtag Me Too unless you're a Jew to hashtag Believe Israeli Women. We've gone from dehumanization, which is the silence around the rapes, to delegitimization, which is that the rapes did not occur, to double standard, which is asking for proof or not applying policies as they would for others. And that's anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. The denial began almost immediately. There was a rape crisis center in Canada that put out a statement that the rapes did not occur. If you want to see what's happening, because it is loud, all you have to do is look when someone like Sheryl Sandberg, a big name with a big following, posts rape is not resistance, which you would think, how could you not agree with? But then click on the comments and you will see the denial that the sexual violence of October 7th is a disinformation campaign by the Israeli government, that it is Zionist propaganda, that, and I hate saying this because I don't want to give it any air, but they are also saying that the IDF committed the rapes, which we know is false. Horrible, horrible lies. And even that New York Times investigation, if you look at the comments, page after page after page, calling it lies, and people are believing it. The disinformation is widespread. A young person on my staff shared with me this morning that the thumb is on the scale at TikTok. And even social media platforms like Meta and X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, they have policies about violent event denial, but I don't know that they're implementing it. And even if they implement it, is there any teeth to it? So how do we expect survivors to come forward in this environment? Our hope is with the Israeli women who have formed the Civil Commission on October 7th, crimes by Hamas against women and children. These women are international law experts. They are experts in violence against women and girls. I have faith that what they are collecting, there is plans to do something with that evidence to somehow hold accountable those who perpetrated these crimes against humanity. I know that there are international laws that allows perpetrators to be held accountable for rape used as tools of war. If and how these laws can be applied to Hamas, I don't know. The Biden administration also did release a memorandum last November strengthening sanctions, financial, diplomatic, and legal tools that can be used to address sexual violence in conflict zones. Again, I don't understand what, if anything, has or could be applied to Hamas. And if not Hamas, possibly could be applied to states who fund Hamas. There is a roundtable on the Hill this Wednesday on the issue. I'll be speaking there. And hopefully we'll be sharing what I'm able to that, comes out of that. So just as I screamed at the silence, I will fight against the disinformation. And I hope you will join me in that. I once heard that in this age of information bubbles and deep fakes, the danger is not that people will believe the lie, but that they will not believe the truth. And if we learned anything from the Holocaust, it's that the world forgets and the world denies, and we cannot allow what happened, what is happening, to be erased. And so I say, for the women who died and the women who will survive, we cannot, must not let what happened to them be forgotten ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you so much. Miriam, I'm so glad that you were able to log on, and we had intended to have you speak first about the situation on the ground as you are working with victims and with relatives of victims and the wider ripple effect in Israeli society. Meredith was just laying out for us the international response, lack thereof, what the nature of the challenges are. So I'd like to turn back to the person-to-person perspective and the reality of what is happening on the ground and how our community can be of help.
Thank you, and I'm very happy to be here with everybody. It was a little bit challenging, this technical entry. Thank you very much, Meredith, from what I did here. First of all, the fact that any of you are here listening to this and caring about this issue is already extremely empowering for us, because one of the things that's been the most difficult and challenging thing for us here, especially those of us who are working in feminist organizations and working with sexual assault survivors, has been the deafening silence of the world and the hypocrisy of the feminist organizations, human rights organizations. That's one of the things that's impossible for us to get our head wrapped around. It's just been extremely painful for us, especially those of us who have actually our whole lives been dedicated to feminist theories and all these writings and human rights activists and all these organizations, and to see the lack of solidarity and the hypocrisy has just been something that has just been extremely, extremely painful. If it wasn't enough to go through everything we went through and the atrocities of October 7th, the aftermath, and actually the two-pronged aftermath, it started actually with denying that it ever existed, and that's come back again, and it was AI and it wasn't really happening. Or I don't even know what's worse. We have the Susan Sarandon version of standing out and saying that what happened on October 7th is justified because of the occupation, which is absolutely outrageous. And for somebody, I've been opposed to the occupation my entire time I've been in Israel. There's nothing to do with the occupation. There's nothing to do with what we feel about Israeli politics. And I have a lot to say about that, the government or policies. What happened on October 7th has to be understood that it was one of the worst incidents in history. It was an absolute massacre. It was pogrom. It has nothing to do with liberation. It has nothing to do with freedom fighters. It has nothing to do with justice. And there's no way ever to have rape be used as the weapon of war. There's no way that it can be used as a tool. There's no way that it can be justified. There is no but. There's no but to rape. And if we actually came through and we actually believe in all the successes that we've achieved in the Me Too movement, and we actually believe victims, how could it possibly be that, like you mentioned, the director of a sexual assault crisis center, rape crisis center in Canada is questioning survivors? This is everything that we've learned and everything that we've done for survivors in all of the last, in the last decades, and all the progress that we've made. We've been thrown back now, and unfortunately unable to understand how this could possibly be. We all know that we're supposed to, we've come a long way, and that we believe the victims and we believe survivors, and now all of a sudden we're questioning, and now all of a sudden we want them to bring forensic evidence, and now all of a sudden we want them to have video clips of the actual sexual assault and the rape, when in essence, there's more evidence now, evidence-based, about all these atrocities that happen than there ever has been in any rape in any history of anything that we know. I mean, we deal all the time with he said, she said kind of stories, and we never have eyewitnesses to gang rapes. We never have Zaka attendees that come and see this mutilation to bodies. We don't have pathologists that have the actual mutilation scene. One of the things that was really frustrating is that there was such a huge mass of murder and mutilation and violence that in these pathology units that were set up in Abu Kabir and Shula, they didn't think to actually take evidence and take the evidence from the bodies, but they saw, and they weren't like actually documenting it, because no one was thinking that anyone could ever deny something like this. But there was absolute testimonies and of doctors that saw, pathologists that saw. There's testimonies of the Hamas terrorists themselves saying that this was part of their intention. This was a mass plan. This wasn't something that happened by the way. This wasn't something that happened randomly. This is something that was a complete weapon of war. It was as a method of humiliation. It was a method of violence, and it was something that the whole world should be able to just be outraged by something like this. And we had, again, you mentioned the UN Women. It took them 2 months to actually come out and condemn something like this. The special envoy that was here in Israel, after 4 months, all of a sudden saying that she can't sleep at night. Well, hello, this has just been something that we've been talking about for the past 4 months. So if it wasn't bad enough that everyone in Israel, I mean, it's such a very, very small, familiar society. There's not a house in Israel that people don't know somebody that's been murdered, that's been kidnapped, that's been affected by this horrible, horrible, horrible massacre. And it's been a very, very, very challenging time for all of us here, in general in Israeli society, and us at the Rape Crisis Center, Sexual Assault Crisis Center. We were actually, after we tried to make sense of what was going on, because there was absolutely no way to make sense of any of it, we had to basically immediately go into action, which was actually a very challenging thing, because a lot of our volunteers, they themselves have husbands or sons or wives, or they themselves are in reserve duty, have people have members of the family who were affected, mutilated, kidnapped, murdered. All of us have children who have friends that were affected. One of the women on my staff who was doing a lot of our resilience workshops in the beginning, her nephew was killed in battle, actually a month after it all started. So there's been a widespread effect on all of us. And what we were seeing was one of the hardest things for survivors in general, survivors of sexual assault in general, was that all of a sudden we were seeing that that this whole everything that was happening on a world and international basis was echoing the discourse that we're so familiar with sexual assault in general. Because what were they saying? We don't believe the victims. This never happened. You're crazy. This is exactly what happens to survivors all the time. So this entire discourse around it, the entire subject about what's happening to the hostages, the testimonies that are coming back about what happened to the hostages, about what happened at Nova, at the music festival, what happened at the kibbutzim, is something that's very, 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 very triggering and causing lots of post-trauma for survivors in general. So we had to get up and be on the ground immediately. We had to give our volunteers a lot of training to deal with trauma in general, because we were getting a lot of spillover calls from just the regular trauma hotlines, because they couldn't even handle the degree of a mess and chaos that everybody was in. And it's actually ironic and bizarre, but our volunteers were having, like, their safe space is to be a hotline for sexual assault crisis hotline. And so when they were having to deal with all of a sudden all these murders and massacres and finding bodies and going through all this trauma, we had to give them a lot of tools to be able to do the training, to ground and to just deal with trauma in general, and to just in a lot of ways a lot of them were extremely affected by the war as well. So it was hard for them to be there for other people. We had to be there for them so that they could be there. We have to help the helpers. We automatically started doing a lot of resilience workshops for people who were first responders. So we did a lot of first responder resilience workshops we did for Zaka, we did for educators, we did for therapists, we did for all different kinds of people that were coming in contact. We did a few also trainings for the people in the evacuation, people that they're being evacuated, which is also, everything is just so complex when it comes to sexual assault, because everyone in Israel now is talking all about solidarity and moving, and we're all going to be together, and no one likes to talk about the things that are happening in these close circumstances, and people are living in these impossible situations right now, and it's fertile ground for exploitation and for abuse in those places as well. Unfortunately, it's not something that people want to talk about, but it's definitely something that we're seeing. We're also seeing, because the Israeli civil society has gone above and beyond any imaginable expectation, and has just been incredibly amazing to see what's being done by civilians and by citizens, but the government has basically not functioned at all. And we've been seeing lots of the public services have just completely collapsed. A lot of private one-on-one counseling has just been overflowed, and they're on overload completely. So we had to respond immediately and open up lots of support groups. We opened up in the past 2 months over 10 different support groups for survivors, so that they would have some place to come and have legitimacy to talk about sexual assault, because there's been what we call some sort of hierarchy of pain, and a lot of sexual assault survivors don't feel like they have the legitimacy to talk about what's happening to them and how they're being triggered by this whole thing. Who am I to talk about this when in Kibbutz Be'eri people were murdered, and in Nil Oz 1/4 of the population was either murdered or kidnapped? So a lot of what we had to do was to give these people justification, for the legitimacy to come and to be able to have a safe space where they could talk, and that we would be there for them no matter what. We didn't have the privilege to be off. We had to just be on. So we had to work during the sirens and during all these attacks that were going on in Tel Aviv. And the first month was a scary place, as was the rest of Israel. And it was something that we needed to just be on the ground and do. In addition to that, we have a testimony project where we actually we have two witnesses who bear witness to all different kinds of traumas and sexual assault, and we expanded this program. We also did a little bit of training with the IDF with the program that they were going to launch, and we also expanded the program to deal with therapists who were treating victims from October 7th, because a lot of times these therapists have just been really, they've just had to just dive in inexplicable circumstances, and a lot of them are getting professional supervision, but we were here to actually be able to just be there for them and have them be able to tell their story in a safe place, and have someone to be there for them. It seems like it's something that's so obvious, but it wasn't obvious, and that we've seen a huge need for that. And lots of them, the responses that we've had to this is that how therapeutic that could be for them, because it was just a place for them to have their space and to tell their story. In addition, we have had a lot of work that we're doing with all different communities, as I said, and all different kinds of resilience workshops to try to deal with all the trauma. I mean, normally we get to places where we deal with post-trauma, and right now we're still in the thick of the trauma. We're in the thick of war, thick of trauma. The whole hostage crisis is just also something that's just impossible to get our heads wrapped around. How could it be that we're living in a world where babies are ripped out of their beds and taken hostage, and this seems like it's normal to barter and bargain for this? And what's happening to these people and what we know is going on, it's indescribable, and it's something that we never understand. And for the Israeli psyche, it's also been something that's been very disillusioning, because we all walk around with some sort of, in the back of our heads, with the notion that the IDF will always protect us. And if something happens, even these kitot konenut that they have, these I don't know what you'd call them in English, but it's kind of like a guard that they have on each of these settlements and kibbutzim. They're supposed to be able to protect the kibbutz for 5 minutes, 10 minutes until the army comes in. And the fact that the army wasn't able to come in, and the fact that these people were in these safe rooms for 30 hours, and the fact that people were being kidnapped, and the visuals that were being sent out during having women kidnapped and having blood in their genitals, and having them just be totally humiliated. And we also have reports of men who were abused, and who were with objects and genitals mutilated, and all kinds of things that were just way too much for people to be able to handle. And it's something that we still can't understand, how this can actually be a world where you said something about truth and lies. It's kind of like we're living in a world where truth has become a lie, lies have become truth, and there's no rhyme and reason, and there's nothing. And this, when we look at what's happening in the States, it's also a little bit hard for us to understand how all of this identity politics has just become something that's just become so superficial that there's just we don't want to confuse people with the facts. So, we have our template, we have our conqueror, we have the person who's we have the oppressor, we have the oppressed, and we don't want to confuse anybody with facts. And we don't want to, make the picture, we don't want to mess it up at all. So we just keep on going on with this narrative that doesn't really have anything to do with what's happening in reality. And that's also something that's very frustrating for a lot of us. I can say, you mentioned the Holocaust. I'm a daughter of Holocaust survivors. I never thought it'd come to the day where children in Israel would be hiding in a closet. All of this just doesn't make any sense. It's all, I said a lot. Yeah, probably I could go on for hours. So you could, I see that you're making signs that I have to,
Oops. Thank you so much, Miriam. And of course, thank you for all the work that you're doing. I personally am in awe of you and your staff and your volunteers. I have a couple of questions to start off. There are questions in the Q&A. feature as well. But first question I have is, you had indicated that civil society has been so wonderful. Are you seeing an absence of a problem of a stigma? In other words, do you think that there will be that people who are survivors or even hostages who are released who have been traumatized in this way will have to confront that kind of stigma, because that has been very common. People have been talking about the pregnancies and, whether that's even something plausible. If you could talk about how society in general, at a
Well,
very
I can
big
say in general that there's been lots of dilemmas, but for us, it's not a dilemma at all. There's no doubt that the world needs to know what happens, but there's also no doubt that that could happen at the expense of any one individual survivor. And we all know, anyone that works with survivors or with sexual assault, that the worst possible thing that you can do is what we try to do after somebody suffers from sexual assault is give them back the sense of control and power that was taken away from them at the time of the assault. So the worst possible thing that you can do is try to force them to come forward in a situation where they can't come forward. So when the special envoy of the UN was calling out and putting all this pressure on survivors to come forward, it was completely outrageous, because what she's doing is adding to their guilt if they didn't have enough, okay, and also all the feelings of shame and all the feelings that we have of people who feel in general sexual assault, and putting it on them when there's no need for that at all. Because as we said, once again, we have testimonies of Hamas terrorists, we have videos, we have testimonies of eyewitnesses at the music festivals who were made to watch gang rapes. We have testimonies of people who spoke and who saw the bodies. So we don't need to have these individual survivors to have a peep show and have everybody come up and show what's going on and put them on trial and put them up and show, so that we don't need that. It's so clear what happened. And this is just more continuation. So when people talk to us, we do not disclose ever any kind of information of who turns to us, who we're working with, because that's the only reason, not the only reason, but one of the reasons that people turn to us is because of the discretion and because of the anonymity, and because they know that they can come to a safe place that we will give them as what they want. We come and listen to them, and we will walk them through it on their terms. So at the beginning already, it was clear to us that people weren't going to be coming forward, that people weren't going to, all of a sudden, all the stigmas that we have about sexual assault and all the stigmas we have about rape are all of a sudden going to vanish. And now all of a sudden everyone's going to embrace these people, and we're not going to have any kind of prejudices, and we're not going to have any stereotypes. And these people are going to come forward and be, I was raped, I was impregnated. That's just never, ever, ever going to happen. We knew it wasn't going to happen. We actually, in addition to the letters that we wrote to the Red Cross demanding that they do something other than be an Uber service and actually try to do something for the hostages, we demanded that they stop this threat and stop this danger that everyone was that the hostages are exposed to. But in addition to that, in Israeli hospitals, the police turned to them and tried to force them by order to reveal information about the hostages that came back, about what happened. And we absolutely adamantly opposed to that, because Israel is such a small society. By manner of elimination, it is very easy to understand who's who. And there were already tons and tons of rumors about specific hostages that came back. And that's the last thing that we want, is these people to have to carry that shame. And no one knows what it's like for the price of a sexual assault survivor to have to be outed, okay, against her will. When she's ready, we'll be behind her, we'll be with her, we'll go hand in hand. But we have no right to force or to impose or to put any kind of pressure on any survivor or anybody that's close to her. And there's a problem here, because we're living in a world that's just insane and that doesn't believe these things that are just horrifying. And that's definitely a problem. But once again, we can never, I know I always say that I have, like, as executive director of the Tel Aviv Sexual Assault Crisis, I kind of have two hats. One of my hats is every single person that comes in here has to report to the police, because then society will finally know what the extent of this phenomenon is. And people won't open their eyes every time I say 1 in 3, 1 in 5, and I give the statistics. But on the other hand, we will never wage that struggle on the account of an individual survivor.
And if I could add, I mean, I just want people to understand what Miriam's saying is this has been happening for decades. I mean, this is what happens in normal situations. I don't even know how I say normal, but we know that incidents of dating abuse, of domestic violence, of rape, these are underreported. I am asked so many times, well, what are the statistics in the Jewish community? And you can't get that information. You can't ask that for all the reasons Miriam said. And here you are asking survivors to come out in a world stage where they know they're going to be hated and blamed and shamed and because I saw somebody in the comments said, why, who was not believing them? Who was, well, yeah, there are some, how do I say this? There are some young people who aren't, there were some people who aren't Jewish. There are some, it's a lot of people are not believing in this moment. That disinformation campaign was happening before October 7th, and the narrative that's in place is very strong. And what they are saying, and someone else asked, why isn't Israel releasing all these videos and all this proof? They have been. These everything that Miriam was talking about, the testimonies, the videos, the Hamas admitting to what they did and why is out there. And that is what is being called the fakes, the deep fakes, the lies. That the truth is what is being called lies.
I would say, I would add to that. I was just reading yesterday, everyone knows about the big New York Times thoroughly investigated report that came out at the end of December. But what people may not realize is that opponents of Israel who wanted to deny the truth of this have proceeded to rip apart the testimonies that were proffered in that end of December article. And so the New York Times had to do a subsequent article bolstering and defending itself. And meanwhile, the criticism of some of those families shattered those families even further.
Exactly.
And there was one witness, an eyewitness, who actually said he couldn't bear to talk to the New York Times again because he's going through his own trauma. And as far as people questioning it, I can tell you when the information about this webinar went out, unfortunately, I received, aside from all the comments online, I received a personal email from somebody saying, I hope you're going to talk about why Israel timed this controversy cynically, because they're just trying to cover up what they're doing in Gaza. So this is the climate, which brings me to my question, which is, how do you balance the need to want to scream out and say, but it did happen, look at this, and look at this, and look at this, with not wanting to cave into those double standards? Because at some point you could offer all the evidence in the world, but and have the newspaper of record verifying it twice, and it won't make a difference. And how much of it is playing into anti-Semitism, really? What do we have to do, and how do you balance those two things? Because the people on the question and answer thing are saying, release more information. You have to let, and at some level, you're very limited. Israel's very limited in what it can release, but it's doing its utmost. And how much do we have to kowtow to that?
And also, it's only getting to the people who want to read it. We're not in an age anymore where everyone watches the same 3 evening news channels. You select what you want to hear. We are living all in echo chambers. And that's why I was saying the only way I see some of the negative stuff is when I go into someone like Sheryl Sandberg and click on the comments, and then I see it. So with all of these things being released, they're not convincing anyone of a difference. So what I do is I try and focus on the people who do believe and give them support, the young people on college campuses and the young professionals who are getting more involved with JWI, for example, because they want to find a space where they can be pro-Israel and feel that that is a safe space to do so. And so my energy are going to supporting and lifting those and just trying to share as much as I can the truth. I'm not going to waste my time arguing with trolls. It's not going to get anywhere. So I'm trying to look at the positive, and I'm trying to look at what can we do legally that's going to make a difference? What can we do to create change that's going to address some of the disinformation campaigns? I wish I had answers. I don't, but that's kind of where I'm looking. I don't know, Miriam, how about you?
I think one of the things that's been shocking to me is the endless conversations that I'm having in people in the States who are really, really afraid to speak out and who are hiding their mezuzahs and hiding their Bagen David and trying to avoid any kind of conversations. I've spoken to numerous organizations where people, I mean, one woman even claimed that she feels like she's like the Moranos in Spain, where they have to go into a room and talk about things quietly because it's such a, the subject is so, so controversial. And you know, in this day and age where we don't have any control, like you were saying, about who hears what and what happens, it's really, it's very, very, very challenging. But I think that the one thing that we do need to do, and this is also something that if you ask what can help people here, it's the fact that we know that there are people who are supportive and that believe, and that's a very, very empowering experience. So that's worth a lot. And I agree with you. We can't start convincing trolls and we can't start convincing this whole poison machine, but there has to be some sort of contra. There has to be some sort of method of speaking out and saying this is not true, and providing an alternative understanding of what's going on. But again, we have to be very, very careful. And what you were saying, Julia, it's also we can never cross that line where we have to offer up the survivor as a sacrifice. And we need to do as much as we can to collect testimonies, or for people who want to. And for people who want to come forward, do everything we can to get them out. But again, it's really, really, really sensitive. And the film that was released by the Israeli government, that was also very, very controversial because some of the families were really opposed to having this stuff get out. It was just so traumatic. And on the other hand, they understand that without public pressure and without world pressure, there's no way that the hostages are going to be released. So these are really, really, really big dilemmas that we're facing right now. But we're trying very, very hard to see as much as we can do, you know, around or to support evidence of what happened. And we had a lot of those testimonies in the UN. Somebody from Zaka testified, one of the pathologists testified. And what you said was really, really, really powerful and true, that these men that were made to watch their partners be raped and gang raped, and that is just an unfathomable experience that somebody has to go through. So the fact that they were investigated or interrogated once, and they actually came forward to the police, and they actually went to the New York Times, again, they can't be expected to carry the burden of the world believing or not believing. And it's definitely a challenging problem, and it's definitely something that's even more emphasizes why it's so difficult for somebody to come forward, because even when we have absolute testimonies of something that people eyewitnessed, they're being attacked as lying, as artificial intelligence, as making it up, as crazy, as oppressors, as I don't know what. So,
And that's why I think we have to be brave, and we have to know and see. I was invited by the embassy to go see the footage, and I had so many people in my life say to me, why would you do that to yourself? Why would you go? Don't do that. How are you going to sleep? And I thought, I have the privilege of looking away. I have the privilege of not going, and I need to bear witness, because I need to be able to say to someone, I saw the video. I spoke to the survivor. I spoke to that we have to be brave. Right after, may have been October 8th or 9th, I don't know. I was wearing, my son played lacrosse in Israel for the summer, and I was wearing his Israel lacrosse sweatshirt just because I had to be wearing something with Israel. And I wanted to run out to Bethesda. And for the first time in my life, I thought, should I go out in a sweatshirt with a big Israeli flag on my chest? And I felt ashamed that I felt that way. And I said, no, get in your car and go and wear it. And sure enough, someone walked by me and said, I like your sweatshirt. And that was it. It was just this quick, and it meant the world. And it wasn't because it was such a cool sweatshirt, but I know what that message was in that moment. And that's what we have to do. And we have to be there for others. And we have to, whatever we can do to make sure that Miriam and the advocates on the ground and the people of Israel know that there are people who are standing with them and believe them.
There are so many fabulous questions in the Q&A, and we're not going to get to all of them. We have just a few moments left. But Meredith, one that was particularly intriguing to me was reaching out to non-Jews. And the question is whether it's on college campuses, whether it's in our nonprofit spaces, is there any room for allyship on this issue particularly? I'm not talking about pressuring international NGOs to issue statements. I'm talking about at the grassroots, getting other organizations that understand all of the dynamics that Miriam has been talking about to serve as allies, and so that we're not speaking alone.
Yes. Yeah, there is. There are those who it's a no, just like on college campuses. I remember when my son was in college, there was a student for justice in Palestine who was talking to him, and he said, I lived in Ashkelon. Like, I saw the missiles. She said, you're lying. Like, there are some who are taught, do not listen, do not engage, whatever someone says is a lie. There are women's organizations who have said to me, we just don't know what to say. Will you help us? Will you give us space? We want to do something together. We want to speak out. We don't know what to say. And that's fair. And we're looking at what's the right vehicle for that? Is there a webinar? Is there a joint statement? Is there a mission to Israel? So these things are all in the works. A lot of us are working where we have a community. There's Rabbi Tamar Menashe, who is a Black Jew, is convening conversations around the country, bringing together Black community and white-facing Jewish community to talk to each other and learn. So there is work happening. It's going to take time.
Right. And I know you and I, Meredith, have been talking about actions that we can take. And actually what we were talking about is something that you mentioned, Miriam. From what I'm hearing from you, Miriam, the most important thing that North American Jews can do at this point is to be very vocal and visible in showing our support for Israeli women and for the victims. Does that sound right?
I think there's a few different things. One, the fact that you're even here learning about the subject and you're taking your time to actually hear about this and you care is huge for me. I mean, it actually is really, really empowering, and it really moves me, and it's really, really important, because a lot of times we felt like we were really, I always talk about the sisters and the mothers and the grandmothers and the aunts who formed the Rape Crisis Center 45 years ago, and I tell the story of how it was formed, and I always talk about the fact that they formed it under the motto, "You are not alone." And that is actually supposed to be dedicated to victims or survivors from two different points of view. One is that you're not alone, we're here for you. And one is that you're not alone, it did not just happen to you. This is a phenomenon. This is something that didn't just happen randomly. This is on the base of, it has to do with patriarchy and power relations and all this stuff. And so what you're saying to us is that we're not alone. And so that in and of itself is a really important message. And also to be able to put pressure on as many as many different organizations, as many different people to spread the word. First of all, to have truth be known and to have this to be known, but secondly, to have to the world be outraged enough to be able to stop what's going on, to have the hostages released, and to have this threat stop, and to have also support for the organizations that are working. We also are operating in impossible, circumstances. In September, the government cut our budget by 30%. The budget that we're giving us. We have this huge fundraiser that we do every year in December that we had to stop because of we had to postpone because of the war, and we're all struggling to just see, and all of our needs are just escalating and just all over the place, just completely overflowing everywhere. So it's just this crazy this thing of the needs just keep going up and up and up, and the resources keep on going down and down and down. So on every level possible, we definitely need a lot of resources. We definitely need a lot of support. We definitely need a lot of awareness that's being raised. We need a lot of education, because at the end of the day, unfortunately, this is not fortunately and unfortunately, fortunately, if we have to have faith in humankind, which is really difficult in these days, but I have to have it, otherwise I can't get up in the morning. This is not Corona. This is not a tsunami. This is not something that happened by a national or natural devastation. This is something that was done by people, and the only tikkun, the only repair that can come is by people. So, oh, I don't know. So, we have to just believe that, even like you were saying, Meredith, that, there are some people that they have, don't confuse me with the facts, and there's nobody to talk to. We have to keep on making this effort to try to speak to people who are willing to hear.
So we're going to have to wrap up in a couple of minutes, but there are a few questions on the Q&A from mental health professionals who are experts in this area here, wanting to know how they can help. Is there any opportunity for therapists, counselors to be doing some of this work on Zoom? The other piece, which is connected to that, is could you please kindly put in the chat the contact information for your organization, the website, and anything else, so that people can follow up with you. And so I don't know if there is any opportunity for any of that kind of volunteer work.
First of all, thank you for actually even thinking about it or offering it. Right now, there's a huge shortage of mental health professionals, but unfortunately, the work is in Hebrew. So I don't know if anyone who asked speaks Hebrew or does things in Hebrew. And if yes, it could be something that's, I'm not sure what's happening on the level of Zoom, but I know that part of what's going on is that definitely the language here could be a big barrier.
We have a lot of Hebrew speakers, fluent Hebrew speakers. So, we'd be happy at JCRC to even share that contact information with that specification. We have people who lived in Israel, people who are Israeli, who have moved here, who might be able to provide that kind of help. So we can definitely talk offline about that.
Okay.
Put your contact information in the chat so the people who are interested in learning more about the work that you're doing can find it, make a contribution if they want to. So I somebody just wrote in the chat, I speak Hebrew and I work as a therapist in Hebrew and English, and I'm happy to be helpful. So there may be ways. So I think in the follow-up email, we should send that information out, but with the understanding that the person needs to be both clinically qualified to do this and really proficient in language.
And not only that, it's also particularly there's different kinds of things, but we know from our experience as well that we normally refer, because sexual trauma from sexual assault is so complicated and complex. We often work with therapists who specialize in that area, in that field of expertise, because there's just lots of danger for reenactment and for re-victimization and for this particular thing. If anyone is an expert in that field, that could be valuable information that we could think about as well.
Wonderful. Well, I thank you so much for giving of yourselves. Miriam, I apologize for the technical problems at the beginning. Thank you for sharing of your work. It's nighttime there. I'm sure you're exhausted. And just know that the huge turnout for this webinar is a reflection of our community's deep, deep support. Meredith, thank you so much, as always, for your work and everybody's work at JWI. And just know that Meredith is in conversation with so many different organizations, including with our JCRC, about bringing more tangible, concrete ways for people here to be supporting Israeli women and girls. And we're also, no small matter, doing rallies outside of the Qatari embassy to get those hostages home.
Wow.
As soon as possible. We're doing another one this Friday. So
Wow.
if you are local, please come out to the Qatari embassy. We need to get the hostages home.
Definitely. And I want to just say, I really, really, really want to say thank you for you guys for putting this together. Thank you, Meredith, for the work that you're doing as well, and Julia and Adam and all of you, and Charlotte. And thank you so much for anybody who's actually here and listening. And I really, 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 I mean, it moves me to tears to think that there's actually people out there that care when we've been faced with so much trauma and so much deafening silence and so much denial. It's actually in and of itself very, very empowering. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And we have to believe that we can make a change. We have to believe that, because we don't have the privilege to give up, and we don't have the privilege to let go, and we have to keep on struggling.
We do, absolutely. And we'll be in touch sending out some of this follow-up information. So thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.